I bought my dream car for less than the price of a new Toyota Camry.
These Aston Martins are getting pretty cheap, so they might be a little tempting.
Yeah, they are very tempting, but the question is, should you buy a heavily depreciated V8 Vantage? That's what we're going to find out today. This is a 2007 Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and this generation of Vantage lasted from 2006 through 2017. New, these cars were well over $110,000, and I picked up this one with 47,000 miles, a clean title, for just $33,000, which is pretty crazy when you consider a lot of this car's direct competitors are much more expensive.
When this car was new, it competed against vehicles like the V8 Audi R8 and the Porsche 911. And to find any of those cars in good condition with a manual transmission, you're gonna pay more than double what Tommy got this for.
Now look, part of the reason that those cars are more valuable than these V8 Vantages is they're just a more exotic layout, right? The R8 is a mid-engined, all-wheel drive car. The 911 is a rear-engine car. The V8 Vantage is a more traditional layout. It's a front engine, although technically it's a mid-front engine layout. You can see what I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, I can't open it with that angle. The engine is located behind the front axle, which is pretty cool, but it still is a fairly traditional front engine rear drive layout. Now this early V8 Vantage is powered by a 4.3 liter V8. And this is the second reason I think that these cars aren't as valuable as the Porsche or the Audi, is they're just quite a bit slower. So this is a 380 horsepower car, but just 302 pound-feet of torque. And Aston quoted the 0 to 60 time brand new at bang on 5 seconds. Now here's the thing, these cars got significantly faster as they evolved throughout the decade that they were produced. And then of course you have the crazy V12 versions, but these early cars, although they sound amazing and can be had with a fantastic manual transaxle, they don't quite have that supercar lore that the other two have.
Tom, are you sure that that's not one of the main reasons that the values on these are so low?
Hand-built in England is a byword for longevity and reliability.
Tell you what I do like though, Tommy. Your hood vents are real.
Yeah, there's actually some really cool stuff underneath this hood. So these are functional hood vents, and when the engine's nice and toasty, you can actually see heat rising out of the hood vents. And also, look how bougie my Aston Martin hood struts look.
Yeah, I know they say Aston Martin on them. I bet those are so expensive.
They're so expensive when they break. Now, a couple of other interesting things about this engine while we're underneath here. This engine is loosely related to the AJ V8 engine.
Yeah, which is in a bunch of Land Rovers we like.
Land Rovers and Range Rovers and even the Lexus, the Lincoln LS.
And the Ford Thunderbird.
Ford Thunderbird. But Aston actually did significant development beyond just the standard engines to make them more special.
And look at your big strut brace.
I know, and look at this. It has a dry sump lubrication system.
Yeah, it's all metal. It's very fancy.
So instead of having a traditional dipstick, got this beautiful little cap.
Whoa!
Look at that! That's your dipstick.
Oh, I like that.
How cool is that?
This is the key for the Aston Martin. For one, the actual blade portion of the key that you stick into the car is interesting because it's not your typical style of blade on the key. But the very interesting thing here is this key fob. It looks, for the most part, pretty normal. What's interesting is this little bit of leather that's over the backside of this key is actually covering a Volvo logo, which is where this fob is taken from. Who knew? Tommy did.
Okay, cool. So this key with this kind of crazy circular design is called the Tibby key, and you might think, oh, that's unique to Aston Martin, but it's not. A bunch of Fords and Jaguars of this era use this key, because keep in mind, Aston Martin during this era was owned by Ford, so it's kind of the same key you'd find in a Transit van, but it's also in a V8 Vantage. Now, it's clear that this car has a start button, right? But it doesn't do anything. So how do you start the car? Well, you actually still need the key to start the car. So you put the key in the ignition, and then you turn it to the on position. Obviously, that doesn't turn any further to start the car, so then you go and push the button. But that still doesn't start the car. So what you have to do, key on, foot on the clutch, and then if you see, the start button will actually glow red. So when I push the clutch, it glows red, letting me know it's ready to start. And now you can start the car. And I just love that. There's something so cool about having a sequence. We need more sequences to start things, like a fighter jet. It's awesome. All right, Case. On the road in the V8 Vantage.
I'll tell you what. That sound and experience alone is worth 30.
Oh man, it's unbelievable just how much V8 goodness you can get for under $35,000.
Think about it. Our Ford Maverick hybrid with cloth seats is 36.
Yeah, and this was 33. Now, poking around online, the prices on these vary a little bit. The earlier cars are going to be cheapest, and then the later cars and, you know, the V12s are really expensive. But the early cars, realistically, 30 to 40 grand will get you a pretty good one. And there's a bunch of different versions. There's the coupe, there's the convertible, and then the second biggest thing that'll dictate price is, do you want the manual transmission like this car,
Which you do,
or the automated or the automated manual version, which is the automatic version.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that that's less expensive.
Yes, they are. And it's not like you know, some cars, like we were just talking about early R8s, right?
Yeah.
There's a $20,000, $30,000 difference between an R-tronic car and a manual transmission car. The manual to automatic V8 Vantages, you know, might be $5,000 difference, you know, 4 or 5, but for that 4 or 5, you want the stick.
Definitely. But that's a crazy illustration of just how inexpensive these vehicles are, because sometimes a price difference on an early R8 between an R-tronic and a manual is about as much money as one of these costs.
That's the whole car. And you know, you were talking about this earlier in the video, and I do want to talk about just the price difference between this car now and its competitors, because this car was more expensive than a first-gen R8 when it was new. They came out roughly the same era, like the end of the 2000s, middle to end of the 2000s. And an R8 now with a manual is going to be, like you said, double. And this car's not. And, you know, I think that R8 feels more exotic than this Aston.
Yeah, and potentially feels a little bit better made as they're starting to age, because it is an Audi. It's got that, at least, if nothing else, the reputation of German build quality. But being in this vehicle, it does not feel, to me, in any way poorly constructed.
Let's talk about the seats in the V8 Vantage. Now, they're actually quite good. It's a one-piece bucket seat, and they use a really, really, really high-quality leather that feels very voluptuous. Pretty sure that's the word. Sumptuous. I'm getting closer to the touch. But the thing about these seats is you really have to take care of them, and you really have to condition them. And what can happen is, what we see in pretty much every V8 Vantage seat over the years is that the leather becomes kind of loose and then just looks like my old grandparents naked. It's just all flabby, and there's... You get the point though, like it doesn't become taut anymore, like a tiger, as Andre would say. But it is one thing worth noting is you'll see a lot of these old Astons that'll have this problem where the leather kind of loosens up over age.
Why did they have to be naked?
Because that's the only way you get to see flabby skin on an old person.
It's unfortunate.
Now, the reason that I was so drawn to this car as a kid, and the reason that it's my dream car today, is because of the looks. I still believe that these Aston Martins from this era, this is called the LH platform, is one of the best looking cars of all time. I mean, this LH platform comprises of cars like the V8 Vantage, the DB9, the Rapide, you had all like the Vanquish stuff in that era as well. So there's a whole bunch of cars, and they all share this incredible stretched, low, long design language. And what's cool about this is it's kind of hard to make a perfectly sweepy design look cool, yet have a little bit of edge to it. And I think that the designers absolutely nailed it with this Aston Martin. And it doesn't matter which one you get, if it's a Rapide, if it's a V8 Vantage, if it's a DB9, they all have this beautiful, swept back, curvy look. Now, one kind of thing worth noting about these cars is they're made almost entirely out of like a bonded aluminum. And in the event of even like a minor fender bender to the quarter panel, they can be extremely difficult, hard, and expensive to fix. So you want to make sure you keep the design looking this good without running into things.
Good advice for a lot of cars.
So the center console of the Aston demonstrates one of the biggest problems with new cars. And
Are you tweaking?
no, I'm ready. The center console of the Aston demonstrates one of the biggest problems that we find with new cars, and that's the lack of buttons, which I really think is going to age a lot of cars. But when you have physical buttons and knobs and dials, it is almost a timeless look. And I kind of feel that's how this Aston works. Now, obviously, you do have a little screen here for the audio system. It also shows you outside temperature as well as inside temperature. That's all located through there. You've got your little presets buttons here. This did have Bluetooth, which is a 2006 Bluetooth. I have no interest in trying to find out if it works, but you have this really beautiful physical clock located right here in the center of the dash. And then the climate controls are all real metal. So Aston really prioritized making sure all of the buttons and switches you touch feel great. And my favorite are these buttons down here for the AC, the recirc, the hazards, the traction control. They just have a great little click to them. And then these circular buttons are also continued back here, where you're going to find your little parking sensor button as well as your rear defrost. But everything you interact with feels great, except for one thing, which does not feel very good at all. It's the navigation system. Now, it's hidden underneath this panel, and I think if I push enter, we might be able to get it to pop up. My little gears have stripped, which is a very common issue on these Aston Martins. But there you have the navigation system, which has now risen out of the dash and works about as terribly as you'd expect it to work for navigation that's 20 years old. So it's a very low quality. You can sort of kind of see the various things that it offers. But what I do is hit shut down and then help it close.
I'm glad you're putting it away because it looks very limp.
It does look limp.
Yeah.
It's gone all floppy on us.
Looks like an Atari.
It looks like an Atari, says Mary. It does look like an Atari. That's why it lives underneath this panel and you never touch it. Also, I promise that it doesn't do this horrible flashing thing you're seeing on the camera. That is just the frame rates kind of fighting the 2006 dot matrix displays. I want to talk about the reliability because that's going to be every single comment on this video is it's cheap because it's crap. But folks, I've really done a lot of research and there are plenty of forum posts and even longer articles about the longevity of these Astons. And it's important to realize that this was a very important car for Aston Martin because this was the Ford era, right?
Yeah.
And much like Land Rover in this era, Ford came in and fixed so many of the reliability concerns, and these cars genuinely, I swear on anything at this point, are known for actually being pretty good.
Yeah, of course, it's not going to be a Toyota Land Cruiser or something.
It's not going to be a Camry.
Yeah.
Right?
But for what it is, it's really not bad. I'm not convinced that there would be a dramatic difference in the reliability and longevity of this vehicle than there would an Audi R8.
Yeah, and like you look at the common issues, and there's a couple little things, but it's not like these engines are known for failure. Clutches can go a little prematurely on these cars, which is an expensive issue because it's all in the back, right?
Yeah.
But there's not like crazy major failure points, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, now that's not to say this is an inexpensive vehicle to own and maintain, because still parts and service on this is going to be more expensive than the majority of cars, of course. For example, Tommy very recently had a chip in this windshield.
Yes.
And it was really important to get that filled in before it spread across the entire windshield and became a crack instead of a chip, because how much does it cost to get one of these windshields replaced?
Great question. So I went to my usual windshield company and they said, we can't actually get those windshields. You have to go to the Aston dealer. And then you're realistically talking a couple $1,000s. So maybe 10% of the value of the whole car just for a windshield.
Yeah, which is a lot. So this is definitely a car that you want to be careful with. If you're having to make monthly repairs on it at the dealership, those costs are going to add up. But if you drive this vehicle like most people are probably going to drive it, and like you drive it, which is an occasion vehicle, a nice day, a date night with your wife, something like that, then this car is definitely feasible to own. If you're trying to daily drive it, it's going to get a lot more expensive than 30 grand pretty quickly.
Now it's important to remember that the V8 Vantage is a sports car. You know, you could argue it's more of a Grand Tourer, but I would argue the DB9 of this era was kind of the Grand Tourer and the V8 Vantage was more the sports car. But even still, the interiors of these cars are absolutely beautiful, and I love how everything is lined in leather. So, for example, this door panel, the entire thing, the inner and the outer, is lined in this stitched leather, which is awesome. Same thing with the binnacle cover and the dash cover. Of course, same thing with the seats and the steering wheel, but it gives a very, very refined experience. Even the little details like the inside of the door panels are lined in leather, which is just so cool.
Another cool part of this car is the operation on these doors. For one, the door handle sits flush, very aerodynamic, but Aston Martin calls these swan doors. So if you look, the doors open upward, and even so, they stay in place when you let go of them. And this is supposedly so they do a better job of clearing curbs. The other thing that I like a lot is that it's not a notchy door opening, so you can pretty much leave the door round about wherever, and it'll mostly stay. It's pretty cool.
Swan. Ready for the actual swan? I think this is a good example of the attention to detail that Aston put into this car. Even the fuel cap is real aluminum, which is awesome, and then it lives in that little hole, just like that. Pretty cool.
How do you pop that?
Ooh, good question, Mary. It's all fun. Everything in this car has got a button, which is great. There's a little button down here. You push the little button. Boom! When we talk about the driving experience, let's start with that engine, because it really, by modern standards, doesn't feel that fast. 380 horsepower is pretty good, but really you drive torque, and 302 pound-feet of torque, not that much torque.
No, it's not insane. It's not a blow you back into your seat kind of car, especially in the modern age of EVs that accelerate nauseatingly fast. But it's still pretty decent. It's not that much of a stretch to sit into this car and think, yeah, this is a performance vehicle, especially with that soundtrack backing it.
You're exactly right. This is an experience car. It's... Oh God, it's so good.
Hearing a V8 sing like that,
Pretty special.
that is music. And that's one of the things I actually like about this car is that it's kind of the right blend, because as we all know, and I think most of us accept, when cars get to a certain level of being fast, then it can take away from the experience a little bit. This is not a Miata in that you have to wring it out all the time. This is still, it's got a motor under the hood, but it kind of splits the difference between being a quick car and being a Miata that you can actually drive hard more frequently.
That's a great point, Case. I didn't really think about that. But yeah, with 5 seconds to 60, right, you can go through a couple of gears without getting to go to jail immediately speeds, right? Yeah. So you can go first, second, and third, and you might be going a little bit over a country road speed limit, but you're not going over a highway speed limit. So you get to hear that incredible V8 howl and still be doing 65 or 70 miles an hour instead of 130 miles an hour like you would be doing in a 911 turbo.
Yeah, there's something to be said for the whole slow car fast thing rather than driving a fast car slow. And I wouldn't call this necessarily a slow car.
It's not a slow car. It's just
it's kind of somewhere in between. I think it's a healthy mix between the two, and it sounds fantastic. It's still old enough to be analog, so you've got hydraulic power steering, you've got a manual transmission. It's a naturally aspirated V8 that revs high. So this is an old school formula that's been great ever since its conception. It's still great to this day, and it's something that's kind of hard to find now.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason that you can pretty comfortably buy a car like this, let's say for $36,000 or $37,000, right, in really nice condition, and own it for a couple years, actually put some miles on it, and still have it be worth that money, because this is an experience that you really can't get that many other places today.
Yeah, absolutely. When so many, even performance vehicles, high-end vehicles, have gone away from the manual transmission, this is a breath of fresh air. A performance car that's still analog and sounds like that.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, with a manual especially, it's just such a cool thing.
Now, for a little bit of symmetry, they did something interesting with the gauge cluster here, where the tach actually goes the opposite way of the speedometer. But it's a little hard to focus on that when you're listening to the noise this car makes. Mary's impressed. Mary loves loud cars, right, Mary?
No.
Of course, the Aston Martin has an extremely classy button to pop open the trunk, because you couldn't have it any other way, Tommy. And there we go. It's the trunk, definitely big enough for golf clubs. I think Aston Martin thought it was big enough for persons, since they included that.
Well, here, we'll give it a go. Now, here's the thing. This trunk is kind of oddly shaped because...
Oh, you gotta take off your shoes to get in the Aston Martin trunk?
It's a premium place to spend time, Case.
Yeah.
It's like going to your house. Oh, this is not a one-person trunk.
It looks comfortable. It looks cozy.
It's cozy, but the problem is you've got this kind of weird hump back here, which takes up a lot of the space. And I think that this is because this car has a rear-mounted transaxle instead of a transmission.
Yep.
So the whole transmission is kind of over back here instead of behind the engine. But
noticing that your trunk struts aren't as fancy looking as the ones under the hood, do you think these have been replaced?
Oh no!
They don't say Aston Martin on them.
Case, that's terrible news.
They're liftomats.
Liftomats. Ugh, this car's totaled.
Get rid of it. Oh, it does say Aston Martin on it. Thank God. Got concerned. It's also cool that this car splits a little bit between being a sports car, being focused, being tight, but also relatively comfortable. This is not such a hardcore car that you can't use it to go to dinner on a date night. Even do maybe a little road trip if that's your speed. Throw an overnight bag in the back, find a nice hotel somewhere, have a nice drive.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my favorite parts about this car is the suspension is perfect. Like, it's pretty taut, and you can definitely have some fun with it on a twisty road. But to your point, it's also perfectly fine on a rutted out highway.
Yeah.
Right? The steering is quick enough and gives you enough feedback where you can kind of feel what's going on in the mountains, but it's not so tight where it feels twitchy. And I think that's one of the reasons that when this car was new, it was looked down upon, especially compared to like the 997, 911, is it's not as quick, it's not as precise in the turns as that car. But now that neither of these cars are considered that quick or that precise by modern standards, you kind of are better off getting the one that's an experience that's a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, and some people out there, every other time they're driving their special car, their performance car, it's on a track, and then it makes sense to go for something a little more hardcore. We live here in Colorado where a lot of our roads are pretty rough. They're not the smoothest roads anywhere in the country, and this car has a nice balance between the two where you can do plenty of spirited driving, but it's not going to beat you up.
You're 100% right. No, I agree with that completely. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, and this is a hot take, I think the R8 is a more special experience, and I understand why those are very, very valuable, right? The thing that I struggle with, and part of it is they're just the kind of the car of the last couple of years, but I've driven a couple of 997, 911s, and the turbos are incredible performers, right? Mm-hmm. But the interiors kind of let the car down. Like, it's a lot of hard gray plastics that probably looked very popular when Bono was huge, but you know, kind of doesn't feel, that hasn't aged that well, where I would argue that this car as a whole has aged incredibly well.
So long as you keep the screen folded down.
You can't lift up the screen.
Yeah, and
Exactly
the car might
right.
not let you because, like you said on yours, the gears could be stripped.
Yeah, so you want to keep that screen folded, but the actual like use of leather and stitching everywhere is pretty cool.
I agree.
It ages it very nicely.
There's a lot of really good materials in this car, and the design on the exterior of this car hasn't aged a day.
Yeah, the design, I still think that these like mid-2000 Astons, be it a DB9 or even a Rapide or whatever, look almost better than the new V8 Vantage, which starts at $195,000, by the way.
Which is more than $30,000.
More than $33,000. And then lastly, the last thing I'll say is the reason I love this car is when we first were getting into this car reviewing thing, a local dealer lent us a 2009 Vantage, and it was like, as a kid, it was the first like actually cool car I'd ever been. And that, you know, you get that imprint when you're 12.
Absolutely.
And that's why I've been so excited and so grateful to be able to own this car, is because that's what got me really excited about Astons when I was a kid. And now that I'm 28, you and I think a lot of other people can buy this for less than the price of a new Miata. And this is a lot of car for less than the price of a new Miata.
It really is. So I'm excited for you. I think this is a really cool purchase, one that I know that you'll enjoy for the next while.
Well, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure you will anyways, and talk about how terrible these cars are and how it will definitely blow up. And if it does, I'll be sure to update you. But for the meantime, this has been Tommy.
And Case.
Head over to TFL Classics. We got more classic and used car videos.